Hey everyone, welcome back to Salt Life Builds. My name is Drew, and I make a lot of mistakes. But just like Thomas Edison, who said, "I didn't fail, I just learned 10,000 ways not to make a light bulb," I keep going. And since I started this YouTube channel, it's been a huge learning curve, but I absolutely love it. It's been pushing me to do things that I probably never would have done if I didn't have it. And this project is one of those times. So let's just dive right into how I built this glowing golden chessboard. For the checkered pattern, I used Maple and Walnut. I needed 4 12-inch long, half-inch wide strips of each material. So I measured out my lengths and used my miter saw to make the cuts. The maple strips were already a half-inch wide, so I used them as a gauge to set my table saw. I then ripped the walnut to the correct width. The strips were then layered in an alternating pattern, and then glued together. I used 3 clamps to hold the strips together, and I used 2x4s with screws to keep them flat. Once the glue is dry, you may remove the 2x4s and the clamps. And because the strips are only a 1/4 inch thick, and I didn't want to risk ripping them apart, I taped them together before removing them. I had an extra 1.5 inch walnut strip, so I set my table saw to the correct width and ran my glued panel through it. Like I said before, these strips are only a 1/4 inch thick, so after alternating them into the checkered layout, I needed to create a base that I could glue them onto for strength purposes. I found it easiest to glue directly onto the strips and place the cut board on top. I added the 2x4s again as clamps, waited a little bit for the glue to dry, and then removed them. To create the channel for the lights, I needed a platform that was 2 inches wider on every side. I then took my carpenter square and measured 1 inch from the edge. This is where the frame of the board will come to. Glue and clamp once again. For the frame, I stripped a 2x6 into 2.5 inch wide pieces. I then had to rabbet the sides for the platform to rest in. I cut 2 of the ends to 45 degrees, matched them up using the platform, and found the perfect length for all the sides. Because it was a square, all of the frame pieces were cut to the same length. I checked the fit, and then glued and pinned the frame together. There are 2 main parts to this build, the top and the bottom. So before I permanently fastened the platform into the frame, I traced it onto a scrap piece of plywood that'll be used for the bottom. I also used the frame as a reference to cut 1x4s for the bottom as well. With the bottom frame taped together, I was able to pin nail the plywood in place. I then took 4 2x2s that I had cut to 3 inches long and glued them into the corners. After a couple of minutes, I flipped it over and pinned them in as well. Now that the frame has had time to dry, I can lay the platform in and pin it down. Check to make sure that the top and the bottom fit. And measure to see what the sides need to be. Mine were about 3 inches tall. Finally, cut them to the correct length, and don't worry about them being exact, because I will be making corner caps out of scrap. For these, you just need to cut 3 dados into 1x4s. Then, cut them 3 inches long and cut 45-degree angles at the ends to give you this really cool end cap. Now it's time to drill the hole that the lights will come up through. The important part of this step is to make sure that you keep the same corners matched up, because the light switch will be accessed through the bottom. I used the switch as a rough guide and then proceeded to hack my way through the bottom. Since this casing will be completely covered, I was more worried about functionality than appeal. I then sanded the top using 80 grit, then 120, then 180, then 220, and finally 400. After wiping down the top, I used walnut stain for the frame. And natural Danish oil for the checkered pattern. I used the walnut stain for the bottom frame and sides as well. After the stain was dry, I pinned the sides to the 2x2s. To prep for the epoxy, every single crack needed to be filled. So I used silicone, and it worked amazingly. To wire the lights, I pulled them up through the bottom, and then up through the hole that was drilled through the top. Add glue to the 2x2s and rest the frame on top. Make sure it's straight and pin it down. Work the lights around the channel using the previously laid silicone to hold them in place. You can take the corner caps you previously built and glue them down as well. To cover the lights, I added reflective glass shards and gold tin flakes. I layered them one at a time and added a couple layers to create depth. Then, mix your epoxy and evenly spread it out over your board. And this is where I made my mistake. When pouring epoxy, you really need to make sure you seal your wood prior. If you don't, air bubbles will work their way to the surface as the wood releases it, giving it this bubbly look, and it kind of ruins it. So the only way to fix this was to sand all of the bubbles out the best I could. I was only able to get the very top ones at the surface. I ended up pivoting and using some of the gold flakes from before to cover up the remaining bubbles the best I could. I then mixed up another batch of epoxy and poured it over all the flakes. There were a couple bubbles still visible after I poured it, so I took some flakes and placed them over the top. To release the fresh bubbles, I used a heat gun. After the epoxy is cured, I'm able to bring it inside and put it to use. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and just remember, failure is never the end of the road. It's what you do with it that matters. So if anything, I hope you take this as a lesson to just continue to push forward, because who knows, maybe if you hit a bump in the road, you can still create something that you're really proud of. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.